Stacks up to some other metropolitan areas. Now, I can provide the data source if there's anyone on the committee who's interested and would like to have that data at your fingertips. I'd be happy to provide the source. But it's from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and essentially what I've done is just put some cities whose unemployment rate falls below Dallas, including Atlanta, including Austin, and some cities whose unemployment rate is actually quite higher than Dallas, where you've got New Orleans running at about 11%, so quite a bit higher, getting on to twice as high as Dallas-Fort Worth. That's just to give you an idea sort of in terms of where Dallas is now. We looked at changes over time. Now I'm sort of saying, okay, where does Dallas fit relative to some other very large metro areas? Okay, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so I wanted to, before I talk about just these few points about the things that we ought to keep our eyes on, I wanted to connect back to a couple of the comments that other speakers made, and here's why. There were some problem areas, if you will, some economic issues and challenges that we needed to pay more attention to before COVID-19 than we were paying attention to. And through the COVID-19 pandemic, it's become increasingly clear how important those economic issues are. Let me give you just two examples. One of them is the challenges of childcare, and particularly not just for working women, but for working families. Okay, the challenges of childcare were highlighted by the comment that Omar Narvaez made regarding the healthcare workers and their suggestion of how important it is to vaccinate the teachers. Okay, so I think that people have really realized through the pandemic that childcare and who's going to be at home or who is available to meet the needs of children as they change has really been highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And part of the point I'm trying to make is that that was an issue that was there before, but the COVID-19 pandemic really brought it to light. Another issue that I would highlight that was a problem area that we probably weren't paying enough attention to before the COVID-19 pandemic hit was the stagnation of people's wages. So, you know, as labor economists, we tend to fall back on the term wages, but let me be clear that when we say wages, we mean people's annual earnings, we mean hourly wages, we mean how much people were offered on a new position. You know, all of that figures into what we kind of generally tag as wages. So people's income has been either very flat in terms of keeping up with inflation, or people have lost ground in terms of keeping
up with inflation. And what that means is people's pay has not been going up as quickly as their expenses have. And we can go back at least to about a 10-year period when that's been true. Okay, so why do I bring that up? I bring that up because the fact that people have been struggling, even higher income people, even college graduates have been struggling because economically or financially in many ways, because their pay wasn't going up, but their expenses were rapidly increasing. Many people have been right at the edge of being able to manage financially. Okay, so in comes the COVID-19 pandemic. That has meant a lot of job loss, and it has meant hours being cut. It has meant people not being able to move on to new jobs when they were hoping that they were going to be able to move on to higher paying jobs. So I say all that to say that some of the problems that have been exacerbated through the COVID-19 pandemic, economic problems, they were there before. And so we're not only thinking in terms of how do we address the COVID-19 pandemic, but in light of those economic issues that were already real and already there, how do we make progress with those as well? So finally, to conclude, I would note three important areas that we should keep our eyes on in terms of the economic recovery. One of them is education. And I would bring that up because education policy is economic policy. That's the simplest way I can explain it, right? What we decide to do in terms of investing in our children and their education feeds directly into how the economy is going to look in 5 years, in 10 years, and 20 years. So children falling behind in school and the persistent digital divide, those issues were already there. But the COVID-19 pandemic has blown them up and has made them problems that maybe to some seem too large to address, but we really do have to address them, right? Because it matters when children are falling behind in school, and it matters when it's certain children who are falling more behind. The second point I would make would be having to do with mental health, right? The direct link between health and how well people do in the labor market is often limited to physical health, but we really need to pay more attention to mental health. And we know that there are some short-term, and we don't know what the long-term mental health effects of the COVID-19 pandemic will be, but we can rest assured that there will be some, right? And we need to think about that in terms of the economic recovery. The final point I would make would have to do with the social determinants of wealth. Health. I said wealth. It all ties together. But the social determinants of wealth have not only to do with racial differences in the incidence of COVID-19 and the higher death rates from COVID-19 in the African American Hispanic communities, but more generally, that transcends race, has to do with where you live, where you work, how much education you have, impacts your economic prospects. The COVID-19 pandemic has made us see this in ways that we didn't see before. So moving forward in terms of recovering economically, we want to pay even more attention to these social determinants of health than we have paid in the past. Those are my comments. Thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm happy to take questions, time permitting.
Thank you, Dr. McElroy, for being available to present this important information as we look at 2021 and the hope coming with the vaccine and potentially more funding from the federal government to allow us to be able to stabilize some of our businesses. And thank you also for being one of the speakers when I had hosted the conversation on the economy and the African American community. I appreciate that information and your insight on that. At this time, I'm going to start with Chairman Atkins. He's chair of our Economic Development Committee, and he'll be followed by Councilmember Blewett, who's the vice chair.
Thank you, Chairman Casey Thomas. Get my mic on. Okay, caught me fast thinking. Or eating, Casey.
That's all right.
Ms. Macaron, a couple of things that you brought up on the slide, and I think it's COVID crisis that we got education number one. But key is, how do we make sure that we had the the equity in the funding to catch up with the kids who do not have the Wi-Fi, do not have the tutoring to get them in a position to catch up?
So, two suggestions that I would make. That first of all, it's a very difficult problem. The achievement gap between higher socioeconomic status students and high income families and lower income families is nothing new, right? So that was already an issue that we needed to be paying more attention to than we were. Okay. But having said that, the two suggestions I would make would be seeking out corporate sponsorship for providing equipment and even for training of teachers. You know, you have companies like Apple who have the wherewithal, the commitment, and the financial resources to make these types of investments in students and helping correct the digital divide. They want to do it and they have the resources to do it. That would be my first suggestion. My second suggestion would be involving the community in terms of volunteer activities. You know, I might say start with retired teachers. You know, see if you can get some retired teachers and maybe some folks who aren't retired to put together a nonprofit organization that will manage the volunteer activities of persons who are willing to work with students to help them get caught up, right? Those would be my two suggestions. One being the corporate and one being volunteers who are willing. I know there are enough volunteers to do the work that's required to help those students get caught up, but we need a system for getting that done.
Well, I think that's a great point. And when I look at the North and the South, you know, to tell the two cities, then we said that number one, we need to get more corporate to be more engaged into the community, into the school. Right. And as you know, that's been very difficult because you look more towards the southern part of Dallas, we don't have that many corporate really engaged into the schools, you know, and that's a serious problem. What can we do to shine a light and to make sure, hey, you need to get more engaged because build your education, your workforce, and quality of life, and your higher quality education, we would be able to train that, which that would lead right into our workforce development. We got to train our workforce, because if you can't train your workforce, if you're not educated, so they both work together. And Chairman Thompson, you know, doing a great job. They said, hey, we got to be workforce readiness. We also got to be education. We also need a corporate people to sponsor these kids or these students to make sure they do have all Wi-Fi. They need, you know, the tablet, the computers, the stuff they have that for normally the kids on the southern part of town do not have that. They don't have accessibility to that. So by economic development, we are short of equity there with the tools that we need to order to survive after this pandemic. We don't have the tools.
Right. So here's one thing I would also pay attention to. I think that the coalition needs to involve just the parties that you mentioned. So I would say the city, so city government, corporate sector, Dallas Independent School District, if there are other school districts that are relevant, but certainly Dallas ISD, right? I would call those corporations, I would call them out quite simply in terms of spending, right? So why should all of the resources be on the northern side of things when you're talking about that north-south divide, when the spending is not all on the north side? So you need somebody who can, you know, I'd love to do it, but the demands of UT Dallas, I can't do it, but I certainly would be willing to volunteer some time to work on it as a project. In other words, the corporations know that everybody buys cell phones. They know that, right? And so maybe it's a matter of having a conversation to remind them of that, and then to show them these are the kind of support, this is the type of support that's needed, and it's needed everywhere. And maybe some types of support are needed more in the southern sector than they are in the northern sector, because parents in the northern sector, generally speaking, have more disposable income to buy those devices and pay for the Wi-Fi that students so desperately need now in this online world. that make sense?
Well, and it, yeah, this makes sense. I mean, it's great. Chairman Thomas, we always talk about equity. Equity is a big deal. How do you share that equity back to the southern part of town, and how do you get those corporate companies, invest into the southern part of town?
Right.
And that is very, very difficult. We've been trying to for decades and decades. We always say equity sounds great, but how do we do it? You made a great point, and I think it's that in our marketing department, Catherine, what she's trying to do, but we need to make sure that we're working with you, Ms. Macaron, that how do we start now during this pandemic? How do we start right now during the pandemic? Because we already know we're going to be way behind in education. We're going to be way behind in equity. We're going to be way behind in workforce training. All these things we're going to be way behind in. So therefore, we need to put a big spotlight on what is our negative in terms of negative into positive. And how do we do that? We got to shine that light on the negative in the southern part of Dallas and get a beacon of light to say, this is what we need to do in order to get this when we come out of this pandemic. So we know what the problem is, but we need to fix the problem.
But rather than thinking about the pandemic only in terms of exacerbating a problem, and I even said that, and that's what I believe is true, but rather than thinking about the COVID-19 pandemic only in terms of exacerbating a problem, why not also think about it in a positive way as an opportunity to solve some of those pre-existing problems? Because we've got to be as creative as we've ever been right now if we're going to address some of those equity issues that have become, some of those divides that have become larger as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Right. So in other words, okay, now is the time we've got to roll up our sleeves and really be creative.
Right. And last question, Chairman, that's a suggestion. I think that we got to work together with DISD, UNT Dallas. We got Dallas Independent School District. We got the junior junior college, DCCD, Dallas County. They all need to come together to work and come with a plan. We got to come with a plan. And I understand the pandemic is one, but right now we got to make sure that we can have a better quality of life in the future.
Yeah, right.
In order to have a better quality of life, we got to have a better education. We got to have a better workforce. We got to have better partners. They all got to work together in order to have a better quality of life. If we don't work together, we're going to slip. So that's what I'm trying to say is we got to work together and we got to come to a reality. In order to be a strong city in the southern part of Dallas, we need help. We got to work together.
Right. Absolutely. And, those colleges that you mentioned, put UT Dallas on there.
Got UT Dallas.
Provost, and I know the provost and I know the president. I know a lot of the department chairs. They know me. So let's have that conversation about what can UT Dallas do? And now that we're all online, we're looking for some innovative ways to use what's going on in the real world to teach our students. I certainly am. I mean, I always am, but certainly in the pandemic, it seems like there are more opportunities than ever.
Well, thank you, Chairman Thomas.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I enjoyed being with you all today.
Oh, stick around. He's just the first committee member.
I won't leave. I'm right here in my house. I promise I won't leave.
I understand. I'm right here in mine. Councilmember Blewett, Vice Chair, Economic Development. Did we get him switched over? Is he still switched over? I know he was calling in.
Hello.
Okay. Well, yeah, Councilmember Blewett. Okay, we'll come back to him. Councilmember Resendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. McElroy, for your presentation. I really appreciate the topics that you focused on. You said education policy is economic policy, and I really appreciate that because I always say that education is the foundation of society. And I previously served on the school board. One other thing I've heard is that housing policy is education policy. So, as a city, we need to also think about the way we're developing our neighborhoods, the way we're building our communities, and trying to find ways to have, for example, mixed income communities, so that the wealth gaps that we talk about can be limited. And you also mentioned the digital divide. I mean, you're speaking my language. That's one of the things that I've been pushing even prior to the pandemic, and I really like your optimism, and I like the fact that you're pointing out that these issues predate the pandemic, and issues like lack of economic opportunity, poverty, those type of things weigh heavily on people with or without a pandemic.
Absolutely.
Like you said, the pandemic exacerbated these issues, but these issues are serious. These issues are real with or without the pandemic. These are the issues that are causing, related to crime. We have a violent crime issue in our city. And so just moving forward, I think as a city, we need to make sure we focus on providing the resources where they are most needed. And there's so many ways that we can do that as a city, I think, because you also mentioned mental health. And obviously there are professionals to try to address mental health issues, but what the city can focus on, one of the things that the city can focus on, I think, is when we look at the way we look at transportation, the way we look at ways for people to get around in our community. One of the other issues that I've talked about a lot recently is trails and the ability for people in any community to get out and do some exercise. And that's one of the things that I've been focusing on since this pandemic, and it has helped significantly with my mental health. Honestly, I get the opportunity to get on my bike and hit the trail, ride 20 miles, come back, and that helps tremendously. And so ensuring that every part of our city has those same opportunities, I think, will go a long way to help address the mental health piece. And obviously that goes into the social detriments of health as well, because the more people you have outside exercising, those type of things, being active will obviously help increase or improve our health. So thank you so much for the information you provided. I think it helps us to stay focused moving forward. But we also need to realize that reality is that funding is limited. So I think it's going to take a lot of political will from the members of this body to do the right thing and put resources where they are needed the most. So thank you for that. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
You're very welcome. And thank you.
You're on mute, Mr. Chair. You're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councilmember Resendez. Thank you, Chairman Atkins. In this Zoom/WebEx world, it's easy to start talking and thinking people hear you, and you're on mute. Chairman Mendelson next.
Thank you so much. Dr. McElroy, I really enjoyed your presentation. This is a topic of considerable interest to me, and I've been participating in a lot of sessions about how we can support our children and our families in every different circumstance. I think that one of the things that you said that is just so important is really your advice that we have to come together, because really this problem is too big for any one entity to solve, and we can't do it alone. I will say that I'm proud that our legislative agenda includes advocating for education, and certainly it's a big issue that's going to be a hot topic in Austin, and we've got to support our schools. So many of these issues are connected. whether we're talking about transportation, childcare, public safety. I mean, like, so many of them are connected that it can't be just the city. It's got to be every stakeholder, businesses, nonprofits, education, all of us together. And so, do you have any suggested frameworks for making that happen?
Well, I think the framework, for as well as I understand the task force framework, that seems to be a good one, with people who are not only knowledgeable but also have practical experience, or are in positions where they're, working with in a particular area on a day-to-day basis, like housing, for example. Because I don't know how the task forces have been structured in terms of their objectives, the one suggestion that I would probably make, if they're not already doing this, is having a few specific goals, right? Because I know certainly in the university, one of the things that can be frustrating to us is the committee of the committee of the committee, and just kind of wondering where the activities are going to lead in terms of what are we actually trying to do here, right? I can remember that before I came to UT Dallas, I was a professor at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, and I remember telling my dean once, please don't put me on that university committee to discuss childcare, because they've never done anything in all the years that I've been here. No offense to anybody personally, but we need some action. So I think a good approach is brainstorming about the problems, deciding what are the most critical problems that need to be addressed, and thinking in terms of what are some practical, maybe it's a nonprofit organization, maybe it's bringing together nonprofit organizations that already exist, but that aren't necessarily working together, bringing together, transportation, housing, education, health, right? Not necessarily trying to do everything, but having some clarity around, here's what we're going to try to do, because we think right now these are the most pressing problems, or the ones in which we're in a better position or the best position to address, right? So in other words, we have to go home happy that we've decided here's what we're going to do, but we have to go home a little bit disappointed because here are all the things that we know we're not going to get to this year, but we recognize them as important problems. So yeah, I would think some type of structure to bring together these nonprofit organizations would be a really positive step in the right direction.
One of the fantastic side effects of having instituted our rental assistance program has been just what you described, is newfound collaborations between our nonprofit partners that have helped us with dispersing those funds in the community. And they've developed relationships with each other and with United Way as sort of the technical assistance arm for a whole bunch of nonprofits that have really just done an exemplary job reaching out and getting resources to our most vulnerable and needy residents instead of sort of a blanket approach. And so I think you have some good ideas. If you continue to think about it and you have other suggestions, I know Chair Thomas would love to hear from you. I think we all would on the committee.
Thank you.
But I know you already have that connection, and I certainly would appreciate any advice you have, but I think you're spot on, and I appreciate all your efforts on this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Blewett, can we switch him over?
Yes, sir. Am I here?
Okay, you're there. Go for it.
Good deal. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms. McElroy. I think your presentation is spot on in a lot of ways. First of all, I would start out, my wife and I talk about this quite a bit. That COVID has been problematic in a lot of ways, but we think that it's exposed a lot of chronic problems that were already here. And I appreciate you mentioning that. I think that's an important point for us to really consider as we go forward. But a lot of the problems we're dealing with have been here. And so I think that's a really important point to focus on.
Thank you.
The second point that I would go to, I also have a lot of kids, and we laugh about it, but I have 7 kids, and they're in DISD, and they're at all grade levels. And I know firsthand the challenges of what that means with what happened this past spring, what's happened over the summer and now what's happened in the fall. You know, at DISD in particular, we talk about reading at third grade. Reading at grade level is very important. And I know that those kids that fell behind this past spring and then summer, and then typically in the fall, we play catch up, they didn't get that. So I think a whole bunch of kids have been left behind, not just 1 year, maybe even 2 years. And I don't know what we're going to do about that.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So I'm very concerned about that. And I appreciate you bringing that up. But I do think that focusing on how to get these kids caught up is going to be a critical problem for us going forward. And of course, I have younger kids. I also have college age kids. So I see what's happening there. I'm not happy with what's happening to our younger people.
I totally agree. In fact, my mother is a retired teacher from Dallas ISD. She taught in Dallas ISD some 31 years. And I was really shocked to hear her say, in terms of worrying about children falling behind, she said, they just need to not have school for an entire year. And I thought, I can't believe a retired teacher is actually saying this. Now, I think probably that's maybe not the solution, because that's gonna trigger so many other issues to address, mainly the issue of parents and work, right? So I don't know that that's the solution, but I think part of where she was coming from with that was this idea of acceptance of the fact that, yes, children are going to fall behind, right? There's no substitute for teachers in the classroom, right? And of course, that's a self-serving comment for me to make because I'm a college professor, but I have felt such tension and distance, right, from my students having to teach them fully online, understanding why that's the case. So again, I would go back to figuring out ways to marshal those resources and human resources in the community. There are a lot of people who would be willing to volunteer their time, but they don't want to organize it, right? They don't want to set it up. But if it were already set up, then you could get a lot of retired teachers and other maybe retired folks from the IT sector, you know, a lot of different sectors. I think you'd find people who would be willing to volunteer.
Well, I think it's going to take some leadership, because I think one of the bigger problems, and we touched on it on a previous presentation, is that when we went into COVID, we didn't know the duration, right? We thought it might be 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and now we're talking about 8-10 months. We're talking about another 6 months with vaccines. So this is now a multi-year problem that I don't think anybody saw.
Yeah, I think that's true. No, I think that's true.
So, I mean, it's going to take leadership, because now we're in it, and getting out of it, it's a deep hole. It's going to take a lot. And I don't think we've appropriately acknowledged how deep the hole is.
Yeah,
so,
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right.
But this is really economic development. And, you know, Chairman Atkins talked a little bit about, you know, he's the chairman of it, I'm vice chairman of it, and this is economic development. You know, the way I focus on it is specific to my district, truthfully. I recognize the north-south divide, but in my district, it's a very disparate district in terms of economics. I have the entertainment district, the arts district. I also have central business district, and I have a lot of single family homes on the east side. And what I see is on the east side, a lot of people, tech workers, white collar, have been able to continue through Zoom calls like we're doing right now. And so I think their income really hasn't been affected. And while they're isolated and it's challenging, in economic terms, I don't think it's been as bad as my entertainment and arts districts, because those people have been wiped out.
Right, that makes sense.
So the unemployment rate is really not reflective of what's going on. You know, over here on the east side, it's a 0 unemployment rate. In the service industry, it's 50%. I mean, it's unbelievably bad what's happened in the entertainment district and in the service industry. And in the arts community, same thing. So rather than focus north-south, I would like to focus on different economies, different industries that have been disparate in terms of the impact. I focus a lot on the service industry. It's a real problem. So I don't know if you have a thought on that.
No, I mean, I think you're right. That makes sense. You know, there are a lot of ways that we can sort of think about, if it's the city of Dallas or the metro area, how the impact of the pandemic has been different, you know, for different people. And I think your focus on the occupations are different, you know, whether it's geographic or, you know, certain industries have been hit harder is absolutely right. And I think that probably ought to be taken into account in trying to come up with some strategies, right?
It has to, because like I said, the people in the service industry who've been wiped out, a lot of us don't really know that firsthand. And so when we read about the unemployment rate or we think it's challenging, a lot of us don't really see it. I mean, in the education industry, in your industry, still getting paid whether the kids are virtual or not. I know I'm paying college tuition for 2 kids. They're still getting paid even though they're virtual.
That's right.
So
That's right.
we have to focus more on those people who have truly been left behind.
Yeah.
I also see in the blue collar industry, I see a lot of the blue collar and essential businesses, the frontline healthcare workers. We talk about them. While they're challenged with the difficulties of COVID, they're employed too. In fact, we need more of them. Obviously, I think Mr. Narvaez talked about that with capacity of beds is really limited by capacity of healthcare workers.
Right. Yeah.
So
I totally agree with you on that. And I think we've got to find a balance between short-term solutions and long-term solutions, right? And so I think that generally speaking, most people are going to say, let's take steps now that will give us some short-term impact, that will solve some of the most pressing problems. But the truth is, if we don't take a longer-term view on some of these things, like the numbers of doctors, then 5, 10, 20 years later, if a pandemic hits again, we're going to have some of the same issues, like a shortage of healthcare professionals, right? So it sounds crazy. Okay, let's focus on some of the long-term, but I think we got to find that balance.
Yeah, I have 2 other thoughts. One is in economic terms, I mean, the people who I think really we should be focusing on are the people that were already being left behind, the people that were already on the edge. Because again, I do see blue collar workers thriving. I see tech people and people who are able to do Zoom thriving just fine economically. But those on the edge
Right.
that were already just struggling, those are the guys that I'm really most worried about.
Right.
Which goes to my last point.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're in education and I'm a politician. And I think a lot of us sometimes get in our silos and we think that we have the solutions. You know, you think education is going to solve it. And I think maybe politics or government will solve it.
Right.
And we just have to be more honest that it's bigger than us.
Yeah, I totally
It's
agree.
much bigger. This is going to take our entire community. We need to have a lot more engagement with the biggest businesses, the biggest business leaders, civic leaders in this city to partner up with us and figure out how we're going to get out of it, because education isn't going to get us there and government isn't going to get us there either.
Yeah.
So if you have a thought on that, I'd love it. And that's my last comment.
Now, I don't think I have anything that's new for what I've already said. You know, it's just this idea of people being willing to work together. And I think the starting point is exactly what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
The solution is not going to be in any one place. So just like it's not all in government, it's not all in education, it's also not all in health, it's not all in housing and, you know, job creation. It's all of those things. And I think if we can be creative about maybe just starting off with linking a couple of those together, and let's kind of get an initiative going that will help us to move forward in that area, rather than trying to do everything, at one time.
Yeah, I think we need some tiny victories. It's kind of take some small wins and then see where it goes from there. And I guess I do have one more point.
Oh, sure.
Lately, I've been thinking a lot about the 1930s and reading about Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his inaugural speech about fear. And we've got a vaccine now coming online. Yes, we've got protocols in place. What do you think about the idea of fear affecting an economy?
Well, fear always plays a role. People are afraid to take new challenges. People are afraid to go back to school to get their degree or to get some certification that would allow them to move forward, to maybe get a higher paying job or get a job that has benefits when they didn't have benefits before. So I think if we can really get in touch with the fears that are holding people in place and discouraging people from making some changes that will help their families or that will help the communities in general. Again, I think psychologists have a lot to say about that. They can probably help us to understand what are some creative ways and things that we can do that will encourage people to move beyond their fears. And specifically you were talking about before, the fears that people have about taking the vaccine. That seems like one that's right in front right now.
Mm-hmm.
You got to figure out how to get people to understand this is something that you really have to do, not just for yourself, but for your family, for the community at large. It's going to help us. It's like everybody has to play a role in us all getting well, right?
Yeah, I think that's where I'm trending right now. Is like one of the easiest things that you can do, I can do, Chairman Thomas can do, all of us, is to promote the vaccine, to promote the idea of confidence, to try and get the idea of people out there going about their business so that we can help build our economy back and help people faster.
Right. Another sort of practical suggestion, when I went to graduate school at Stanford. I'm from Dallas. I'm originally from Dallas, but I went to grad school out west, and I was president of a graduate student association there. And one of the things that I would do to get people to do things, right, I would divide the task into something so small. I mean, I literally sat there and figured out, how can I make the task so small that someone couldn't say no to me? Hi, can you pick up a bag of ice and bring to the gathering that we're having on Friday evening? Who's going to tell me if I'm the president? So who's going to tell me they can't bring a bag of ice? Okay, that's a different environment that I'm talking about, but certainly we can use that model, right? Once you find those people who are committed, who are willing to give their time, figure out a way to make the commitment, not joining a board maybe that's a 3-hour meeting every few weeks or every month or so, but really a time commitment that seems smaller and reasonable to people. And again, I think the management of that is going to be a challenge, but there are people who are great at that. I'm not one of them. I will tell you, I tell my students I'm calendar challenged, so I wouldn't be the person to do that, but there are people who are great at that. And so thinking about how can you get those folks who are committed in the community to do a small task, and those small tasks together create a synergy that really can help solve some problems.
Well, I appreciate the back and forth today. I find these conversations enlightening, and I appreciate your efforts in being here today.
Thank
Chairman
you.
Thomas, that's my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Blewett, and your points are always insightful. So thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Gates.
I don't have any questions at this time, but thank you for the presentation.
You're very welcome, Councilwoman Gates.
Great. Well, Dr. McElroy, thank you. Hopefully this won't be your last time joining us in this committee. I'm sure Chairman Atkins was also very impressed by the information that you shared, and would possibly look to have you come and present to his Economic Development Committee in the future. So thank you for that. And thank you for your presentation. Have a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and stay safe.
Thank you. Same all to you. And thank you all for all the work that you do. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Genesis, let's take the briefing action item.
Yes, sir. So the next item on your agenda is item C, which is related to amendments to the Chapter 50 Consumer Affairs section of the code. And Carl Simpson is on the line, Director of Code Compliance, available to ask any questions regarding the memorandum.
Excellent. Thank you. Colleagues, we discussed this a couple of weeks ago. We had Reverend Gerald Britt and Pastor Ayers do a presentation to us on the past payday loan ordinance and the recommended changes. We all received a copy a couple of weeks ago. I didn't receive anything in particular, any amendments. So we have this as an action item today. And so we'll entertain a motion at this time.
To approve.
Can we get a second?
Second.
All right. Been properly motioned and second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
All opposed, the same sign. Thank you, colleagues, for us getting this quickly through the committee and to the full council. I believe we should be ready in January in order to vote so we can fix this gap that exists. So many people who've been impacted by COVID won't be impacted by potential predators as relates to payday loan. I think the other items are for are briefings by memo. One, we always want to give our CFO an opportunity to give us an update. We do have a memo, and it relates to the COVID fund. So I want to see if our CFO is on, if she's on, if she has any remarks or comments, or if she's just available for us to ask any questions. This will be our last meeting before the end of the year, and quite a bit of the funding has to be dispersed between now and then. I see Jack is here. Jack, you want to pinch hit?
Yes, sir. Chairman Thomas, I'm Jack Ireland, Director in Budget Management Services. We apologize, Ms. Rach had another engagement, so I am pinch hitting. The memo that we provided provides an update mostly regarding the Coronavirus Relief Fund, the dollars that we received from the U.S. Treasury. And as Chairman Thomas mentioned, those funds do have to be spent by December the 30th. We update the COVID-19 funding dashboard on our financial transparency website every Monday. So the last update was on December the 14th. We showed $135 million. $35 million have been spent or committed. We are working today and tomorrow on processing payroll against this fund all the way back to March. So we expect there'll be about a $65 million increase in this before next Monday. So that'll put us up to about $200 million. We listed on the memo the actions that you took as council last week, where you approved 10 separate items using the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and those totaled over $14 million. So as you know, we're working very hard to get all of the dollars spent. We are intent on getting all of the dollars spent before the 30th and not return anything to U.S. Treasury. It does not appear that there's going to be any extension, so we have 13 days. The latest on additional funding, as of yesterday in talking with Brett Wilkinson and Raf, our federal lobbyist, it does look like that the members of Congress are close to reaching an agreement on $900 billion additional relief. However, it does not look like there's going to be a direct allocation to state and local governments like there was this past spring. There may be some additional dollars available to us through FEMA or some other grant programs, but not a direct allocation. So we will continue to update you on our progress on spending these funds, as well as the other grant funds we've received. So with that, I've just summarized Ms. Rach's memo. If there's any questions, I'll try to answer those for you.
Thank you very much, Jack. You know, the potential good news is there is, as was stated, likely a bill that's going to be passed and potentially another bill that's going to provide some funding for state and local. It's not set in stone, but things are looking better than they were 2 weeks ago. And so I want to thank you for that. Colleagues, if you have, because if there are additional funds that will be coming in, if you have recommendations for those funds, I'm going to ask, and I'm going to have my assistant to send a memo out. Email me those recommendations. We want to go ahead and we want to be proactive and begin thinking about now ways in which we can effectively get the money out and we can provide help to our constituents who are in need. Does anyone have any questions for Jack?
Mr. Thomas, I will say in response to what you just said, thank you very much for asking the council for input on that. By chance at 3:30, right after this meeting, staff are convening to talk about that very thing. If we do get money, how do we get it out and how do we get it to the community fast? So thank you, sir, for your leadership on that. And I apologize, Ms. Mendelson, I interrupted you.
No problem. Thank you. You're more than welcome, Jack. I'm glad to know we were on the same wavelength on that, and I will forward that information directly to our CFO. I'll have my assistant compile it, and I'll forward that to our CFO. Chair Mendelson, you're on.
Thank you. Actually, Jack, you had said in your presentation that yes, you expect every dollar will be expended, but every time we have this meeting, I just want to highlight that that is the city's position, that every dollar will be spent before the deadline, because I think the community is anxious when they see the dashboard and there's still so much that looks like it doesn't have a name to it yet, but of course we know it does. So just wanted to make sure that you are affirming that.
Yes, ma'am, you're exactly right. We will spend every dollar and not return anything to Treasury.
Thank you. And then Chair Thomas, I'll just tell you that I don't need to send you a memo because what I think we need to spend additional dollars that we get for COVID on are quite simply Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We need food and we need housing. And it's just as simple as that. As much as I think people in the business community would like additional assistance, there are other government entities like SBA that are still trying to give out money. And at the end of the day, we have to make sure that the looming eviction crisis that's coming and the giant avalanche of homelessness that's coming, that we do everything we can to keep as many people housed as possible, and of course fed. So that would be my priorities, and that's my only input on that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Chair Thomas.
You're on.
I have a real short comment because I would follow up Ms. Mendelson. Apparently, she's going to beat me to the punch, but I was going to ask about the resources. There have been comments out there that we had a lot of money that was not either set aside or committed, or that we would had a lot of available money. So I appreciate you clarifying that, and we're all on the same page. So thank you, Ms. Mendelson, for taking my stealing my thunder. That's all, Chair.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? All right. Thank you, Jack. And as I get that information, I'll get it over to Ms. Rach. We have a couple of other memos. And what I wanted to do is this item E and F. Colleagues, if you have any comments regarding either of those memos, you can make those at this time. Then we also have memo. Oh, go ahead. I want to go ahead and throw this out there. We also have G, which is monitoring enforcement of current city emergency regulations and executive and county orders. So, Chair Mendelson.
Thank you. That's actually the memo that I'm most interested in discussing, actually. Carl, are you on the line?
Yes, I am, Councilmember. How are you?
Good, thank you. So I believe in your memo it says that you have given out 38 citations since you started enforcement in March. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so can you share with us any kind of grouping of those citations to tell us who's getting them?
So for the most part, there have not been any citations issued to religious institutions, houses of worship. And there have not been any citations issued to private residences. So for the most part, the citations that have been issued and notice of violations addressed have been focused on businesses, specifically restaurant and bar type of operations.
Well, I'll tell you, I just want to commend you. In the memo, you go through and talk about how many different warnings you've given, how many different times you've made contact for information and warnings. And it's a staggering number. I mean, y'all have been very, very busy. And of course, we also, stay on top of our regular code compliance needs. And so I just want to say thank you for stepping up. But I also want to say thank you for the way you've approached the citations, that we've only had 38 in all this time tells me that you and the code compliance officers are really trying to work with the businesses to help them understand what's needed for our public health. And so I just wanted to say thank you, and also make sure to note that not a single house of worship or single residence has gotten a citation. So
well, thank you, ma'am. We appreciate it. The code team appreciates it. Thank you.
Take care.
All right. Thank you, Chair Mendelson. Any other comments regarding any of the memos? Councilman Boyd.
Yeah, I have a question for Mr. Simpson that I think he just clarified, just for the public or anybody that's paying attention. Is he still on, or did he take off?
Yeah, he's here.
Carl?
Yes, sir.
You and I have talked about some of my establishments, mainly restaurants, that have stayed open, and we've talked about occupancy limits and your enforcement mechanisms on that. We've also talked about a lot of the complaints I've gotten have been from people that are outside the establishment and perhaps not social distance, perhaps not masked. Could you educate all of us, including the public who are listening, on code and what we can and can't do for outside of these establishments, people that are standing in line that looks like I mean, it's something I get complaints about all the time.
Yeah. So unfortunately, there really is nothing. When you look at the regulations, COVID-19 regulations, there's nothing that we can really hang our hat on in terms of authority to be able to enforce control of outside. The scope of our authority is really limited to inside the establishments. Now, that doesn't mean that we still cannot talk to those managers when we make contact with those business owners and make recommendations and advise that they institute some sort of control with regard to queuing up in front of these properties, in front of these businesses. But as soon as we walk away, or DPD walks away, or fire walks away, they're probably going to go back to the default, which is no control whatsoever.
And I think that's an important point for you to bring out, that you work hand in hand with DPD and DFR. And DFR is tasked with enforcing the occupancy limits, correct?
Correct. Their primary focus has been occupancy, and they've been pretty effective at it.
Yeah, I would say that I have gotten lots of updates about DFR going into establishments, and for the most part, they have worked with the establishments to, if they were a little bit over, telling them to reduce the occupancy, or if there's been just a handful that have really been egregious. Is that what your thought would be?
Correct. That's correct.
Yeah. I think it's important. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, there's been a couple of instances where the occupancy has been so out far exceeding what the allowable limit is, they would pretty much institute an immediate shutdown until they brought it back into compliance.
But I think our people need to know, the residents need to know that code is out there, DFR is out there. We're being responsive to the complaints, but we do not have all the tools that some people think we have to enforce, especially outside the establishments.
That's absolutely correct. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. I think you're doing a good job. That's
Thanks.
all I have, Kara.
Thank you, Councilman Blewett. Colleagues, any other comments, any other questions regarding the memos or the briefings by memos? Hearing none. Genesis, is that all the business of the committee?
Yes, Chair Thomas, that's all the business for the committee.
All right. It is 3:23, and I want to say meeting adjourned. I wish all of my colleagues very Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, however you choose to celebrate. Be safe. I want to see each of you again very soon. Thank you for all your support. This has been a monumental challenge, but it would have been so much more difficult without each of you. And the meeting is now adjourned.
No, we were going to say something, I think.
You got something?
I see other people looking like they want to say something. You can't just adjourn it.
Hey, my mouth will cover. Wouldn't it? Bye, Jennifer.
I logged on to say thank you and happy holidays.
Happy holiday.
Just want to say happy holidays and thanks to all you. Merry Christmas, y'all.
Stay safe. Yeah.
Safe
to all of you.
Bye.
Comment is, here's to a better year in 21, right?
Right.
Cheers to that.
Cheers to that.